Not believing that it was going to work. Yeah, probably. I start bagging it up. Yeah. Hey, but for $11, so you know how your favorite daughter was? From my braiding job, right? Like Friday. So it's someone on Friday had their hands full. I'll probably be braiding. And so the way that our son was getting it's normal and then it kind of slopes down. And I missed it by like that much. Fell straight to here, right here. And right here. She's like, are you okay? I was like, yeah. She's like, you sure? I was like, yeah. My desk cried when they saw that her. I didn't see it. I'm okay. I was myself. Didn't put it right. It helped. But the muscle in my hand probably back. So it hurt all and shut.
That's better. All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It is certainly time for us to begin. If you want to turn over in your Bibles to Genesis chapter 6, we're going to continue studying about Noah. I have thoroughly enjoyed so far looking at these main characters in the book of Genesis. I've studied the book of Genesis, but I've never really, spent the time to go through just the characters and the people as in detail that we're doing in this class this quarter. And so I really feel thankful that we have the opportunity to do that. I don't feel like we're rushed or anything like that to try to get through a certain amount of text or anything like that. We're able to just to study the man or the women, the men or the women that are in this book that will, I think, encourage us. They set examples for us. This past week, we looked at Noah, began to talk about him as a person. We mentioned how his name meant rest. It meant to comfort. He was the son of Lamech. His wife's name is Mrs. Noah, right? We don't have a name by that. I think it's interesting. Let's see. I had somebody comment on my class we live stream it every single Sunday. Somebody commented and just thought how interesting it would have been from the perspective of Noah's wife to have been a part of what was going on there. We see in the text the dialogue between God and Noah, how horrible the world was, how it needed to be purged of the evil, the instructions on the ark and who was to be on the ark and what animals were to be on the ark. But you just think about Mrs. Noah and her perspective of how well she was apparently able to back her husband up and be right there. I just wonder about, the conversations that they had laying in bed at night as this construction is going on the ark.
How do you expect me to keep this ark clean?
Yeah, exactly. You just hear this going on. Great perspective, Jim. She's thinking, do you know how much poop is going to be in there with all these animals? I just think, and it's just an interesting thing to think about for sure. But I love that, and that is, and really what that does for us is it really helps us to see that the people that we're learning about, these characters, are real people. So many times, and I'm guilty of this, I'll say, oh, have you read the story of Abraham or the story of Noah, the story of Moses? And sometimes when we use the terminology as story, it almost sounds like it's something that's, fiction. It sounds like it's something that's, a novel that has been written for us to ingest and think about these characters as if they're in a Broadway play. But these are real people, historical people that lived. And when we think about Mrs. Noah and her conversations, with her husband throughout all of this, I think it brings a sense of reality to what we're reading here in all of this. So I appreciated that comment so much, and I wanted to make sure to mention that. We talked about how Noah lived 950 years, 600 before the flood, after the flood another 350 years. The scriptures teach us that specifically. We talked about how he's a man of righteousness in a time of exceeding wickedness. The wickedness was so bad. I think we mentioned, but I want to reiterate again. We sometimes will say this world is just so bad. It just gets worse and worse. The world that we're living in, it's never been as bad as it is right now. The morality is just so bad. Our country is going down the toilet. It's just horrible. There's no morality. Listen, folks, it's not that bad. It's certainly not as bad as it was right here. It was so bad here that the God of the universe who spoke things into existence said, I've got to wipe it clean and start over with this one family. It was so bad, the scriptures actually say in Genesis 6 and verse 5, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, that every intent of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. I have noticed people, we know people who are just evil people. We may know people that are like, it's not a good man. I don't trust him. Or I don't trust her. They're not good people. These are wicked people. But I think, for the most part in my life, the wicked people or the people I wouldn't trust, the most horrible people, I still feel like there is a little bit of good in them. There's something still there that might be good. There's still potential. Here, God says, the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. There was not a moment of good in anyone, except our friend Noah. And when you turn the page, literally for me, turn the page, you read in verse 8, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. He was different. Noah was different. I'm trying to catch us back up here where we were. There was something different. Now the word here for that where in verse 8 it says, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. You might find your version say grace. Is that true? Anybody have grace right there? Yeah. That's what that is. He found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Which teaches me that Noah was not perfect. Is that true? We know for sure, and we're going to see this morning, Noah's not perfect. He makes mistakes pretty much right after the flood. And so he's not perfect, but he finds grace. He finds favor. God looks upon this one man and says, everybody else is so horrible, but I'm able to extend grace to this man named Noah. Which also makes me think about, and I think we mentioned this last week, but if not, I'm going to mention it again. It also makes me think about Noah's father, Lamech. Chapter 5, we read about him, but not only about Lamech and Noah, but verse 30 of chapter 5 tells me that Noah had brothers and sisters, that Lamech had other sons and daughters. And so what you find here is that Noah, even among his family, is different than everybody else. His brothers and sisters, they're included in that evil and wickedness that's on the earth. Because it is only Noah who finds grace or favor in the eyes of the Lord. That's impressive to me. And so what you find is this, when you make a comparison, Noah's not perfect, but you make the comparison to how wicked the earth was, or everybody else that was on the earth, and then Noah, and Noah was just not as wicked. That's the best way to put it in that comparison. Enough to where God says, I'm going to find grace to give to this man. You know, it doesn't say that Mrs. Noah was found grace in the eyes of the Lord. It doesn't say that Shem, Ham, and Japheth found grace. But I have a feeling, I think under presumption and maybe speculation, we could say if Noah is finding grace in the eyes of the Lord, then the way that he leads his family is in a way that God would have been pleased too. Because he says, you need to take yourself, your wife, your 3 sons, and their wives on this ark that I'm going to tell you how to construct it. That's the kind of person this is. You see, this is a character study that we're doing in this class. This is not just learn the facts of the story. We're looking at these people and learning from their character. So it tells me that if I want to learn how to lead my family, that it's not just me that's responsible to being faithful to God. I've got to make sure that my wife and my children are also finding grace and favor in the eyes of the Lord. It's my responsibility. I want to be like Noah, where it doesn't even have to mention that Mrs. Noah is able to find grace in the eyes of God. It doesn't even have to mention that Shem, Ham, and Japheth are also included in this way of salvation, and their wives as well. It's implied that they too would be included in that way of salvation, in this purging of evil upon the earth. The earth was corrupt in the sight of the Lord, and the earth was filled with violence. That's what we find. So God tells him there's going to have to be this destruction that's coming upon all flesh. That's how wicked it was. There was a need for a purging of all flesh. Chapter 6, verse 3 says, the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days will be 120 years. And so there is this butting of heads between God and the rest of mankind. There is striving. And the reason that there is striving between God and man is God that tells us here that man was fleshly and God obviously is spiritual. God is the standard of what is right and wrong, and man falls short of that. And he falls short from the very beginning when we looked at Adam and Eve. That's the way it was. God created them man and female, and he put them on the earth, and they're of the earth. They fall away, and that sin continues on. Every man, it gets so bad. And God says, I can't be in a relationship with these people that I've created because of this evil that's there. God numbers the days of man. Here in verse 3 of chapter 6, it tells us that God numbered him. His days shall be 120 years. We mentioned how that's about as long as people live as nowadays. After the flood, we start seeing those days begin to be numbered and begin to go down. Whereas we had men that were living longer and longer and longer, and even though with Methuselah and with Enoch, all these other men that still lived a long time, it began to dwindle down, and now certainly no one's living over 120 years. There's a limitation on how long we live. And I think it's because of sin that our days are numbered like that. Yes, sir.
I've been reading Genesis in that Bible that we call But So.
Sure, yeah. The Defending the Faith Bible. Mm-hmm.
And they've got on that 120 years, they make a good argument, but that's how long up till he destroys man in the flood.
Yeah, that's true. That makes a good argument. So people they have said that since the time that God had decided that, since the time that God decided he was going to purge the earth of the wickedness, 120 days was left. A good argument for that. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, did I say days? 120 years from the time that decree was made till the time that the flood waters would come upon the earth. There's both views. There's both views to that. But that's a good argument. And it doesn't make a difference on how you view that at all. But good point. Jim, did you have your hand up?
That was what I was going to say.
Oh, okay, good. Good. All right. So Noah is instructed to build an ark. We talked about the dimensions of the ark. We talked about, if you ever have the chance to go up to the Ark Encounter in Kentucky, then that might be a good thing for you to do. I would love to do that. Be a good maybe weekend trip or something like that to go see all that. 600th year of Noah's life, the second month, the 17th day, the flood begins. Chapter 7, verse 6, water begins to come up on the earth. Let's see, I want to make sure I'm not hitting anything or missing anything. Good, nothing at all. So the water came upon the earth the seventh day after Noah and his family and the animals entered the earth. The fountains of the deep. Do you see this? Verse 12. The rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Now look at verse 17. Then the flood came upon the earth for 40 days, and the water increased and lifted up the ark so that it rose above the earth. And the water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated on the surface of the water. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. Completely covered. It's impressive to me to see how all of that worked out, that there would be that much water. Somebody asked me not that long ago, was this a local flood or was this a global flood? You may easily say, well, it was a global flood. You may say, I know that because that's what I've always been told. So can we find a verse that tells us that it's a global flood, that all of it was covered? And I believe we can. Verse 19, the water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. There is not one little spot that was left. Now, what's the highest mountain on the face of the planet? Mount Everest. Is Mount Everest in the Alps? Is that right? It's in Europe. Where is Mount Everest? I don't even know.
It's in the Himalayas.
Himalayas? Okay. It is European then. Is that right?
Asian.
Asian? Okay. All right. So we've got Mount Everest. And people still try to climb Mount Everest. People have died getting to the top of Mount Everest. Even recently, there's hundreds of bodies that are just frozen up there on the top of this mountain. The earth was so flooded that it's 15 cubits higher than Mount Everest. That's a global flood, folks. Some evidences. This is probably maybe in that Defending the Truth Bible from Apologetics Press. Some evidences of a global flood is right here, even in the state of Arkansas. You can find some fossilized animals that are sea creature animals right here in the state of Arkansas, where it would have obviously never been under the ocean in any time that we've known, except one time. And that's found not just in Arkansas, I just know it is here, but all over the earth, where there should have never been sea-growing creatures. They have found fossils of sea-growing creatures. Just interesting to me. Every bit of it is covered. The water is prevails for 150 days. Verse 24. The water prevailed upon the earth 150 days. So that's how long it was there. Verse 23 of chapter 7. Thus he blotted out every living thing that was upon the face of the land, from man to animals to creeping things, the birds of the sky. They were blotted out from the earth, and only Noah was left together with those who were with him in the ark. People have asked me, why did God have to kill all those animals? Why is that the case? Some of those animals are innocent. And you may even say that some of the babies that were born at that time, whose parents are wicked, little bitty babies, infants that are there, why did God allow those little babies to even be killed? And I have an answer for you. It's a moral answer. First of all, for the animals, of why the animals would need to be killed in this purging of sin. I think we mentioned it last week, but we'll extend it into the idea of even the infants being killed. So the animals are purged in this flooding because the influence of man and their wickedness can even extend into animals. We talked about you could raise a dog and teach it to be mean. And if your thoughts and intentions are only evil all the time, then that's exactly what you're going to be doing. Even the most wicked, those animals are going to be there. So God says, I'm just starting over. I'm starting over. Now the infants, and it really extends this, the same thing. If your thoughts and intentions are only evil, then what are you going to be teaching your children? Only evil. So the potential of what was innocent babies at that time, God already knew in his foreknowledge of what those little bitty babies were going to be if he allowed them to continue to live. And so you have to start over with something that's clean and that's innocent. And what we find is Noah and his family were able to do that. And you think, that's such a mean God. No, it's a caring God, that he would take the brunt of it and purge and kill off those that were wicked and any potential for wickedness. Sometimes it's hard to swallow. Sometimes it's hard to understand. We don't want to picture God that way, but God in his infinite wisdom knows this is what was going to happen and what needed to be done to purge it of that evil. All right. Waters prevailed for 150 days, verse 24. In the 10th month, the first day of the month, the tops of the mountain were seen. So then the waters began to come down. Rains for 40 days and 40 nights. The water prevails. So it rains for 40 days and 40 nights, but the water stays there. It remains even after that 40 days. Can you imagine, again, Mrs. Noah thinking, oh my goodness, when is this going to end? How is this going to turn out? And finally, the tops of the mountains are able to be seen. in the 601st year, the first month, the first day of the month, the waters dried up on the earth. Chapter 8, verse 13. Now it came about in the 600th and the first year, in the first month of the first, on the first of the month, the water was dried up in the earth. Then Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the surface of the ground was dried up. It's impressive to me to think about what he had gone through in just that even short amount of time. Have you ever seen flood waters, even just a local flood? How it demolishes everything, and how long it even the effects of all that remains for a long time. It changes things, changes the surface of the earth, and certainly changed the surface of the earth with Noah. So the ark floated upon the earth, verse 18 of chapter 7. Every living thing was destroyed, only on those on the ark were saved. Verse 23 of chapter 7. Then a dove is sent out, verse 8 through 12. He sends out this dove to see if the water was abased from the face of the land. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot. I think about that poor dove that flew around for such a long time looking for places to land. Couldn't find anything, had to fly all the way back to the ark. There's been a few times that we've been on a cruise, and there's birds that come all the way out there in the ocean, way out there. At least I think it's way out there. You're really not all that far from land. But I'm sitting there thinking, where? They'll, I guess, land on the ship, but this poor dove flew around for such a long time, I guess. Couldn't find any place to land, and comes back. Returned to him to the ark, for the water was on the surface of the earth. Then he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark to himself. And he waited yet another 7 days. Another week went by. See, the water's already gone. And so Mrs. Noah again is going, okay, gosh, this is taking a long time. Waited another 7 days, and again he sent out the dove from the ark. The dove came to him toward evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. I want you to notice this. This is important. Notice the reason for the flood is to purge, to get rid of all life. And as soon as the waters begin to come down, and a dove is able to find something, it finds life. And that's the huge contrast. Everything else dies, and it's not long that God already is providing life again. And we find that first peak of life in this fresh olive leaf. So Noah knew that the water was abased from the earth. And then he waited another 7 days and sent out the dove, but this time the dove did not come back. And that's when he realized, he says, the surface of the earth was completely dried up. God commanded his Noah and his family to leave the ark, verse 15 through 19. Go out of the ark, you and your sons and you and your wife and your sons' wives with you. Bring out with you every living thing of all the flesh that's with you, birds and animals and every creeping thing that creeps on the earth, that it may breed abundantly on the earth and be fruitful and multiply on the earth. That's a key phrase that we have already found in the book of Genesis. At the very beginning of creation, they're told to be fruitful and multiply. So Noah went out, and his sons and his wives and his sons' wives with him, every beast, every creeping thing, every bird, everything that moves on the earth, went out by their families from the ark. And what does Noah do? What's the first response from Noah? It's time to worship. It's time to worship. Our gut reaction for when God saves us should be that we worship. Your whole life should center around the time for us to gather together to worship. You think, well, I've got other things I need to do. I've got things around the house that I want to do. I've got things I want to accomplish or things I'd rather do. Things that can seem to be justified. No, listen, your whole life needs to be centered on worshiping God. When do the saints meet? I'm going to be there. When does the church gather together for worship? I'm going to be there. As soon as Noah comes out of the ark, him and his family, verse 20, they build this altar to the Lord. And they took of every clean animal and every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar to give it to God. The Lord smelled the soothing aroma. Somebody's smoking meat. And the Lord said to himself, I never again will curse the ground on account of man. For the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth. This is just knowledge that God has given to us. But I will never again destroy every living thing as I have done. That's a key phrase right there. A key phrase, as he has done. Verse 23, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease. What do we find right here is that God establishes seasons. Some people have speculated perhaps there were no seasons before the earth was destroyed with this flood waters. It does seem like after the flood that the weather patterns of the earth certainly change. It had never rained. Water had never fallen from the sky before the flood. The Bible says that in order for the water to water the plants and to provide water for man, it just come up from the ground. It's not until the flood that we find that water is mentioned falling from the sky. Something meteorologically changed. And so God, right here in verse 22, establishes something that he may not, and I'm not saying I know this for sure, I say may not have established in the exact way from creation. Here, he says, while the earth remains, there's a time for you to plant, seed time, and to harvest that. There's going to be time for cold, and there's time for the scorching 110 degrees in the shade. There's time for summer, and there's time for winter. It's another way of saying the same thing. And day and night, and it shall not cease. It's going to continue. And we have seen this promise ever since. It's a guarantee. Unless the Lord comes back between now and tomorrow morning, that sun, where are we? South, north, west, east, is that right? Tomorrow morning, that sun's going to come up right over here. I can guarantee it. As long as the Lord doesn't come back, I know it's going to happen. I know it. I know it's going to set this evening right over here. I know it. It's no doubt in my mind. I can set my clock by it. We do. It's not going to stop. And so God gives some instructions then in chapter 9, verse 1 through 7 to Noah and his sons. Verse 1 through 7, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, here it is, be fruitful and multiply on the earth. It's the same command that Adam and Eve were given. You need to be fruitful and multiply. So what do we do here? Well, you've got Noah and 3 other males. You've got Mrs. Noah and 3 other females. And from that family, we all exist today. Here we sit from that family. People say, well, what about incest? Well, it was there. But God, in his infinite knowledge and power, knows exactly how to handle it, obviously, because here we are. It's proof. The proof is You're the proof that God knows what to do with that situation. They replenished the earth. Animals were to be for meat and for them to eat. Verse 2, the fear of you and the terror of you shall be on every beast of the earth and every bird of the sky, with everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Into your hand they are given. You are given these animals. They're yours for the taking. Every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give it all to you, as I have given the green plant. You can eat both meat and vegetables. But then he says some restrictions. Only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood. You shall not eat the blood. Don't drink the blood. He says there's a reason. Surely I will require your life blood from every beast. I will require it. And from every man's brother, I will require the life of man. What a profound statement. Life, the Bible later on in Leviticus tells us life is in that blood. There's something special about blood where life is found. God sets in order again. He knows that man is to sin. And he says, verse 6, whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed. For in the image of God he made man. Again, it sounds like creation, doesn't it? As for you, be fruitful and multiply. Populate the earth abundantly and multiply in it. Then God spoke to Noah and to his sons with them, saying, now behold, I myself establish my covenant with you and your descendants after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the cattle, every beast of the earth, with all of you, all that comes out of the ark, even every beast of the earth, I establish my covenant. It's a promise, it's a commitment. And that all flesh shall never again be cut off by the water of a flood. Neither shall there again be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, this is the sign of this covenant, which I am making between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all successive generations. I set my what? What does yours say? A bow. We call it a rainbow, don't we? It's this arch that's been placed in the sky. After it rains, we see how light reflects through the molecules of the water, the moisture in the air, and it creates this sign. That's why I believe, again, this establishes the proof that moisture had never really been in the air before. If that was the case, the curvature of the earth dictates that with moisture in the air, there is this arch that comes up. And so if, again, this also debunks any idea that the earth is flat. For if it was flat and there's moisture in the air, then the way the atmosphere is there, it would have just been a straight line of color across the earth. But it says that it's a bow. And it's a bow because earth is round, our atmosphere is round. And there's no doubt about it. But aside from the scientific aspects of this bow, this rainbow that's in the sky is set there as a reminder. I believe it was it last Sunday or Wednesday up here at the church? It was we saw it last Wednesday. Rain came through, beautiful, beautiful rainbow. I love them. Every time it does that, I have a tendency to run out and take a picture of them. I just think they're awesome. I'll text my neighbors, hey, y'all come out and look at this rainbow. We've done that, haven't we, Hunter? Look at this rainbow. God is good. He's made a promise that he has a way of salvation. That's what I'm reminded of. He's not going to purge the earth again with the use of water, but he's made a way of salvation. Noah has a life after the flood. He's a husband, he's a farmer, and he's a sinner. Uh-oh. Look at verses 19 through 21. These three were the sons of Noah, and from these the whole earth was populated. Then Noah began farming and planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk and uncovered himself inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were turned away so that they did not see the nakedness of their father. Do you know what the sin was that Noah is guilty of right here?
Indecent exposure.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Not just that, though. Because you could say, well, it's drunkenness. It's indecent exposure. What it is, more than anything, it's the sin of not being in control of yourself. One of the fruits of the Spirit is that we are in control. And when you are not in control of yourself, you get yourself in situations like this. That's the sin that Noah is guilty of just not being in control of himself. Sometimes it's wine that causes that. Sometimes it's other drugs. Sometimes it can just be silliness, stupidity, whatever the case is. You lose control of yourself. Lust can cause that uncontrollable personality, or whatever you want to call it, in your life. Anger, you lose control of yourself. So it's not, you could say, well, anger is the sin, lust is the sin, drunkenness is the sin, indecent exposure is the sin. True. Really the problem is that he's lost control of himself. That's the sin, if you want to get down to it. He's a husband, a farmer, and a sinner, but he's found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah dies at the age of 950 years old. Verse 28 of chapter 9, Noah lived 350 years after the flood, so all the days of Noah were 950 years. I don't have enough time to talk about this. I'd love to. There's so much to talk about. Are y'all okay if maybe half this class next week is finishing up Noah and then we'll move on to Abraham? Because we'll spend a few weeks on Abraham anyway. I can't not teach you about Noah in the New Testament and talk about Noah's salvation and our salvation and give you the comparisons. I can't avoid that. I want to make sure. You've heard it. Haven't you heard it? How many have heard of the comparison between Noah? Don't you think we need to hear it again, just to be reminded? So we'll talk about that. We'll also make the comparison between the ark and the church of Christ. The ark and the church that belongs to Jesus. I have to finish this up with that. So we'll spend some time with that. That one right there? Well, you'll see it next week, Mom. You good? Anybody else want to take a quick picture? And I'll pose if you want. Okay, we'll get out a little bit early to this morning. Thank you so much. I love every one of you.